Joe, first, your thoughts on the past 24 hours. We can go back to Bob Corker versus the President of the United States.
Well, you know, for so many years, we've heard of a coming civil war within the Republican Party from Democrats, from a lot of their detractors in the media, and it's always been a phony war. But the war's not phony anymore. Bob Corker versus Donald Trump. I mean, it is completely out there in the open, but you look at the other senators, too, that find themselves in that position, whether it's John McCain or Jeff Flake or Lisa Murkowski at times, Heller at times. You can go down the list. Two things are really significant. One, people really do believe this guy may be setting himself up to be, if not in name, but in reality, an independent president, a guy that's completely blown up his voting coalition. And that's the second most significant thing, Willie. How does he get 50 votes on tax reform? How does he get 50 votes on health care reform? How does he get 50 votes on infrastructure? Right now, nobody, even inside the White House, knows, because these wars actually upend his majority, his governing majority.
And that's the frustration we've heard from Mitch McConnell out of his office and others yesterday, is they're trying to get things done, and this certainly doesn't help. With us to talk about it all, President of the Council on Foreign Relations, author of the book A World in Disarray, and #1 Yankee fan, Richard Haas. National political reporter for NBC News, Carol Lee. Senior politics reporter at USA Today, Heidi Prisbilla. And Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and associate editor of the Washington Post and MSNBC political analyst, Eugene Robinson. Mika has the morning off. All right, so there's new reaction to Bob Corker's explosive comments about President Trump. But so far, most Republicans not going nearly as far as Corker did with the New York Times.
Sometimes I feel like he's on a reality show of some kind, you know, when he's talking about these big foreign policy issues. And, and you know, he doesn't realize that, you know, that we could be heading towards World War III with the kind of comments that he's making. And it's like it's an act to him.
That's Senator Corker talking to the New York Times. Most Republican senators wanted to move past the unsettling comments and get back to work, it appeared. Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley telling the Associated Press, quote, "I don't see how it's productive, and I think that two words would kind of answer your question from my point of view: cool it. And I think it would help if the president would be the first to cool it. I think it would be better if we stuck to the issues and leave personalities out of it." Senator Marco Rubio responded to a question about the comments, quote, "You'll have to ask Senator Corker what led him to make that statement. I haven't made that statement." Speaking alongside Rubio at a fundraiser in Arizona, Senator Jeff Flake said, "Any of us who've worked with Senator Corker know that he speaks his mind." Senator Rob Portman of Ohio telling the Washington Post, "Bob Corker has been a leader in Congress on issues as diverse as deficit reduction and combating terrorism, and he is a man of unwavering integrity." Said they all need to work together. The senior senator from Tennessee, Lamar Alexander, avoided the issue completely. Quote, "I work with Bob Corker nearly every day. He is a terrific U.S. senator. I'm disappointed he's decided not to seek re-election." In neighboring Kentucky, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said Corker is, quote, "a valuable member of the Senate Republican caucus. He's also on the Budget Committee and a particularly important player as we move to the floor on the budget next week." And during all of this, Senator Lindsey Graham, who had been one of the president's biggest critics on the Republican side, went golfing with President Trump yesterday, tweeting afterward, "Really enjoyed a round of golf with President real Donald Trump today. President Trump shot a 73 in windy and wet conditions." Joe.
Oh, dear Lord. And it's unbelievable. He also is going to talk about his, wasn't it Mnuchin that said his genetics, his DNA was vastly superior to mere humans? A 73 in windy conditions. I think anybody that's played with Donald Trump knows that's new math that he's using on that score. Heidi, let's bring new math, as the kids used to call it. Heidi, so what is so fascinating is you have these Republican senators saying absolutely nothing. And yet, when the cameras are not on, when they can just talk to you and other reporters on the Hill and not be quoted, they sound exactly like Bob Corker does when the cameras are on. The level of hypocrisy in these statements that we just read really is mind-boggling.
It is really striking, Joe, because Corker professed in that interview to speak for the entire Republican conference. And the headline here is nobody disagreed with him. Grassley just said it's not productive to talk like that. And that is what you hear when you talk to these members, Joe, is that they have to strike a balance here between essentially informing the public about what they are experiencing behind closed doors, what their observations are about this president and the trajectory that we're going down with our policy and our foreign policy, and the consequences for that when they do speak out, which is that they only reinforce that behavior, that the impulsive behavior, the behavior of lashing out against them, and that at the end of the day, many, many more of them make the calculation that it's better not to speak out in terms of just trying to keep their heads down and get something done and not stir this president's ire.
Yeah, and Gene Robinson, what's so interesting is Heidi brings up a great point. Yes, nobody came out and strongly defended Bob Corker, but nobody came out and strongly defended Donald Trump either. And even the president's spokesperson, Kellyanne Conway, whenever she would be on our show, would criticize him when the cameras were off. So everybody in Washington, D.C. has said for a very long time the very things that Bob Corker finally said in front of a camera, a couple days ago.
No, that's absolutely right, Joe. I thought the no comments or those anodyne avoid the issue comments from the senators spoke volumes. The strongest was Marco Rubio, who said, "I haven't made that statement." That's not the same as saying that statement is not true. And nobody came out and said, "Oh, this is all untrue." And in fact, by not denying it, the senators basically confirmed it and just said, ixnay on telling the truth about Donald Trump. I mean, that's basically it. And you're right. It's like, let's not upset the apple cart. He's already raging, sort of hate tweeting this show and love tweeting Fox and Friends every day, and spinning out of control in some ways. And really, the question is, we're only 9 months into this thing, right? And he's got more than 3 years left of this. In addition to making all of us just totally exhausted, what does that mean for the country? And how are we going to sort of make it through this long, yawning period in front of us?
And the ugliest part is ahead, because we're going to be talking, Willie, about elections. And you're going to have Donald Trump going out trying to campaign for people, or being angry at Republicans that try to distance themselves from Donald Trump on the campaign trail. And it's going to happen in places. It may not happen in a lot of places, but it's going to happen. And but I want to get back to Corker. Nobody defending the president against this charge that Donald Trump's petulance and his childlike behavior and his horrific temperament could start World War III. Now think about that for a second. The chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in the United States Senate says, we've got a president that could start World War III. Nobody pushes back on that. Is this a remarkable time we live in, with Republicans running for the dark corners, when the most powerful Republican on Capitol Hill in foreign policy says we've got a commander-in-chief that could start World War III, and yet they don't push back on what Bob Corker says?
Well, obviously, Richard Haas, Bob Corker, has a couple of things that have happened. He's not running for re-election, and he knows he's not going to become Secretary of State, which was something that was perhaps on the table in the past, so he's completely liberated to say what he wants. But he indicated in that interview with the New York Times that many of his colleagues share exactly the sentiments he's expressing publicly, but would be afraid to say them out loud. Why do you think it is that Republican senators won't come out and maybe not say he's going to start World War III, but express their own criticisms of the president?
Well, I think by not speaking, they did. And I think what Bob Corker has done, Willie, is brought to the fore the entire question of the president's fitness to be president. So let's put aside all the legal issues. And as I think Joe correctly pointed out, the ideological civil war and Trump running as an outsider perhaps one day. But what this is really about is this gentleman's ability to be commander-in-chief and to make these big decisions. And people are looking at the tweets vis-a-vis North Korea. We're a day or two away from a big decision about Iran. And they are basically saying, put aside World War III. These are truly consequential decisions. And what Corker essentially was saying is, I have no confidence in his ability to get them right, that what's motivating him, the kind of judgment he's bringing, is simply not what is needed. That is a big, big, big deal. And I think that's what's finally on the table. It's the fitness criteria rather than the legal or impeachment criteria.
And Carol Lee, there's obviously this razor-thin margin for Republicans in the Senate at 52 votes if they want to get anything done. And that's the frustration I heard from McConnell's office and other offices, that they really do want to do tax reform before the end of the year, and alienating Bob Corker and others in such a public way doesn't help achieve that agenda. Does Donald Trump care, or is the personal fight and the answering of a criticism more important to him than getting that through?
Well, the president is impulsive, and he tends to, as we've seen before, react in this way when he feels slighted. And he clearly felt slighted when Corker said last week that Defense Secretary Mattis and Secretary of State Tillerson and the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, were the only thing standing between chaos. And so he feels that the Corker threw the first punch, and he is a counterpuncher. And so that's what he did. But you know, he continuously does things like this that are counter to his agenda, which is to try to get something done. He hasn't gotten any significant legislation so far in his presidency. And the comment that I thought was most interesting was Mitch McConnell, who's, was throwing up his hands about this, because he's saying, Corker's a valuable player. This is a guy who has to whip up votes. As you said, he needs to get his members to support a tax reform bill and potentially something on healthcare or immigration. And now you throw into the mix, this is all coming at a time when the president's going to do this risky gambit on Iran, the Iran nuclear deal, and he's kicking that to Congress. And so things are piling up on the Hill, and the president keeps piling up the insults towards the Hill.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.